have the looks and charms, and girl, you know that's all you need.
On September 19th, 2025, the world of rock and roll lost one of its last great storytellers. Sonny Curtis, the legendary guitarist and songwriter of the Crickets, passed away at the age of 88. Most people remember him for writing the rebellious anthem, "I Fought the Law," and for penning "Love Is All Around," the theme song that defined an era of television. But behind these hits was a man whose fingerprints were all over the golden age of rock, even if many never knew his name. Everyone thought of him simply as Buddy Holly's bandmate, a figure standing in the shadow of a legend. But Sonny Curtis had his own battles, his own triumphs, and a journey marked by both brilliance and heartbreak. From the dusty plains of Texas to stages across the world, he lived a life few could imagine. And now, as tributes pour in, one haunting truth remains. His story is far more complex and far more human than the songs he left behind. But the truth behind Sonny Curtis is much deeper.
Sonny Curtis was born on May 9, 1937, in Meadow, Texas, a tiny farming town where music was more than just entertainment. It was survival. Growing up in a modest family during the tail end of the Great Depression, Curtis was surrounded by the hardships of rural life. Money was scarce, work was tough, and opportunities for a boy in a small town seemed almost non-existent. But in the midst of this struggle, music became his escape. By the time he was a teenager, Curtis had already mastered the guitar, shaping his sound from the blend of country, gospel, and rhythm and blues that drifted across Texas airwaves. While most kids his age dreamed of leaving town for work, Curtis dreamed of leaving with a song. It was during his high school years in Lubbock that he met another boy who shared his passion, Buddy Holly. The two bonded instantly, playing in local bands and jamming together in small-town venues. Holly's sharp vocals paired perfectly with Curtis's smooth, innovative guitar style. They weren't just friends, they were brothers in music, united by the dream of bringing Texas sound to the world. What few people know is how young Curtis was when he first stepped into the spotlight. Still a teenager, he recorded with Buddy Holly and lent his guitar to early sessions that would later become foundational in rock history. By the time most kids were finishing high school, Sonny Curtis was already shaping the sound of an era. His childhood was not one of luxury, but of resilience. And it was this resilience, forged in the fields of Texas and polished on cheap guitars, that would carry him into the world of rock and roll.
By the late 1950s, the world was changing, and so was music. Rock and roll was exploding, and Sonny Curtis was right in the middle of it. When Buddy Holly's star began to rise, the Crickets became one of the most influential groups of their generation. After Holly's tragic death in 1959, many assumed the band would disappear. But Sonny Curtis stepped forward, not only as a guitarist, but as a songwriter ready to define his own legacy. In 1960, Curtis wrote "I Fought the Law," a song that would later become an anthem of rebellion when covered by the Bobby Fuller Four and, years later, The Clash. Few could imagine that the man from tiny Meadow, Texas, would create one of the most enduring songs in rock history. But for Sonny, it was only the beginning. He officially joined the Crickets as their lead singer and guitarist after Buddy Holly's passing. Touring across the United States and Europe, he helped keep the band alive while also developing his reputation as a songwriter whose words carried both grit and heart. Hollywood soon came calling. Curtis moved to Los Angeles, where he found success writing music for television and film. His crowning achievement came in 1970 when he penned "Love Is All Around," the theme song for The Mary Tyler Moore Show. The upbeat, hopeful track captured the optimism of a new era in America. Through the 1960s and 70s, Curtis balanced two worlds, the raw energy of rock and roll and the polished charm of television songwriting. He was a man who could write for the rebels and for the dreamers. Yet behind all the success, there was always a shadow, the constant comparison to Buddy Holly, the legend whose absence Curtis was often expected to fill. Fame had given him recognition, but it also carried the weight of a ghost he could never escape.
For all his achievements, Sonny Curtis's life in the spotlight was never without shadows. While he avoided the kind of public scandals that plagued many rock stars of his generation, Curtis lived with an unshakable burden, the ghost of Buddy Holly. Every time the Crickets performed, journalists and fans would ask the same question: how does it feel to step into Buddy's shoes? For Curtis, it was a reminder that no matter how much he accomplished, he was forever tied to someone else's legacy. The music industry itself was unforgiving. By the mid-1970s, rock and roll was shifting, and Curtis's style was sometimes considered too classic for an audience chasing new trends. Even though his songs continued to resonate, he struggled with the reality that fame was fleeting. Success in Hollywood came with its own price: constant pressure to deliver, contracts that left little freedom, and the gnawing fear that one bad year could erase decades of work. Friends recall that during this period, Curtis often retreated into himself. The endless tours, the changing music scene, and the pressure of living up to expectations weighed heavily. Some described him as quiet, almost melancholy when the lights went down. His lyrics often carried hints of loneliness, subtle signs that the cheerful, hopeful songwriter was wrestling with something deeper inside. Though he never spiraled into the addictions that destroyed many of his peers, Curtis's struggle was quieter, more private. It was the battle of a man determined to stay relevant while being haunted by memories of what once was and what could never return.
On September 19, 2025, the music world fell silent. Sonny Curtis, the boy from Meadow, Texas, who wrote anthems of rebellion and hope, passed away at the age of 88. His death was not marked by scandal, but by a quiet dignity, fitting for a man who had always carried himself with humility despite standing among giants. Tributes poured in from musicians across generations. From country stars in Nashville to punk rockers in London, all recognized the same truth: Sonny Curtis had shaped the soundtrack of their lives. For some, he was the man who gave voice to defiance with "I Fought the Law." For others, he was the gentle spirit behind "Love Is All Around." In his final years, Curtis remained active, occasionally performing and sharing stories of the early days of rock and roll. Fans who met him described him as warm, approachable, and grateful. He never projected the arrogance of a legend. He lived as if he was still that small-town boy with a guitar, lucky enough to play the songs he loved. The tragedy of his passing lies not only in the loss of a great songwriter, but in the reminder that an entire generation of rock pioneers is slowly fading away. Sonny Curtis's death was not just the end of a life, but the closing of another chapter in the book of rock and roll history. Sonny Curtis's story is not just about fame or chart-topping hits. It is about endurance, creativity, and the quiet power of songwriting. While Buddy Holly may have defined the face of the Crickets, Curtis defined much of their soul. His music transcended generations, from the rebellious energy of "I Fought the Law" to the tender optimism of "Love Is All Around." Few songwriters can claim to have captured both sides of the human spirit with such authenticity. Friends, colleagues, and fans remember him as a man of humility. He was never the loudest in the room, never the one demanding attention, but his words and melodies spoke louder than any spotlight ever could. His ability to bridge country, rock, and pop made him a rare figure in music history, one who refused to be confined to a single box. Today, his legacy lives not only in recordings, but in every artist who has ever dared to blur boundaries, to take risks, and to write with honesty. Sonny Curtis proved that sometimes the greatest impact comes not from being at the front of the stage, but from writing the words that everyone sings along to. Perhaps the greatest reflection is this: Sonny Curtis was more than just a musician from Texas. He was a storyteller, a dreamer, and a reminder that behind every legend is a human being searching for meaning. His songs remain echoes of a life well lived and a legacy that will never fade.